Hi everyone, welcome back to Radio Night Crime. Before you drift off, let me know in the comments where you're listening from. If you're enjoying the stories, don't forget to like and subscribe. Now let's relax and jump into tonight's case. Story 1. In 2022, a young man named Bryce Brawl disappeared under strange circumstances, leaving only scattered clues and many unanswered questions. His girlfriend Cordelia's family was puzzled by what had happened, and her father, Michael Elix, seemed to know more than he let on. What started as a routine missing persons case quickly turned into a chilling tale of lies, revenge, and desperation. What really happened that fateful day? How deep does this mystery run? Stay with us as we uncover the truth buried beneath layers of deceit and suspicion. It was a cold day in a small Minnesota town, with mist blanketing the streets and a damp chill in the air. The usually quiet town of Center felt even more desolate. This was the last place Bryce was seen, leaving home to visit a storage unit with Cordelia's father, Michael. Cordelia had just returned to Minnesota after months of traveling across the country, hoping for a warm welcome and some peace. Instead, she found herself entangled in a series of unsettling events. Shortly after her return, she sensed something was off. Bryce had gone with her father to drop off some belongings at a storage unit, just a short walk from their home. The trip should have only taken 30 minutes, but as the hours passed, Bryce didn't come back. Cordelia's unease grew. She tried to distract herself by settling in and taking a shower, but the anxiety wouldn't fade. Later that day, Michael returned alone. He looked shaken and told Cordelia that Bryce had been taken at the storage facility. Michael explained that two dark gray cars had pulled up while they were there. People who seemed like officials got out, but they didn't show any identification or introduce themselves. According to Michael, everything happened so quickly that he couldn't ask questions or figure out what was going on. The strangers restrained Bryce, handcuffed him, and drove off. The cars were plain and unmarked, their headlights cutting through the evening gloom, leaving more questions than answers. The fog clouded Michael's memory, and he couldn't recall any details that might help identify who or what he had seen. His vague words left Cordelia shocked. Desperate for answers, she immediately tried calling Bryce, but his phone was off. She sent him messages, begging him to come back and explain what had happened, but he never replied. As each minute passed, Cordelia's worry grew stronger. By Friday, October 28th, after several days without any news, she went to the Crow Wing County Sheriff's Office and filed a missing person report. She didn't have much information to give the authorities except for Michael's confusing account. The police wasted no time and launched an investigation. Detectives reviewed all the messages Cordelia had sent Bryce on the night he disappeared. Her panic was clear in the texts, with each message showing her growing fear. Her distress seemed to strike a chord with the investigators. What started as a standard missing persons case quickly became something much darker and more complicated. Officers questioned Michael Elix, but his statements were inconsistent and left too many unanswered questions. This led to further interviews with him. Meanwhile, investigators visited the storage facility where Bryce was last seen. What they found there only made the situation more mysterious. There were drag marks, like something heavy had been moved, and other pieces of evidence that added a sinister feel to the story. The deeper the police dug into the case, the more unsettling the details became. Bryce Burrell's disappearance wasn't just a simple case anymore. It had turned into a troubling enigma filled with fear and uncertainty. Cordelia, who initially trusted her father's story, started to doubt him as everything around her became increasingly strange and incomprehensible. Michael Elix knew he would be the first person the police would question after Cordelia reported Bryce missing. He tried to mentally prepare himself for the inevitable. That Friday, October 28th, officers tracked Michael down at a family Halloween party in Brainerd. He agreed to return with them to the storage facility and provide a more detailed explanation of what had happened on the day Bryce vanished. Despite this, the story only grew more complex. Each new detail uncovered by the police seemed to raise even more questions. The truth felt increasingly out of reach. Michael recounted the events, trying to include every detail. He explained that he and Bryce had arrived at the storage unit in a white Ford Escape with a trailer to go through some belongings after the long road trip he and Cordelia had recently taken. The task took about 45 minutes, with Bryce sorting through his items to decide what to keep and what to throw away. Around 5:45 p.m., they were getting ready to leave when something unexpected happened. As they started pulling out of the storage unit, two dark gray vehicles blocked their path. Michael described the cars as having flashing lights, but not the kind used by regular patrol cars. Instead, they looked like the lights often seen on unmarked law enforcement vehicles. This immediately made Michael suspicious and questioned if the people inside were legitimate authorities. According to Michael, both he and Bryce were briefly detained by these unidentified individuals. Michael was taken back to his white Ford Escape, while Bryce was placed in a different vehicle, a dark gray SUV. Michael remembered the COV's interior as plain, except for a small computer mounted on the dashboard. During the encounter, Michael said it seemed highly organized, involving several people. Bryce appeared to understand that this wasn't a random situation. Before they were separated, Bryce thanked Michael for his help but didn't say anything else. Earlier that day, on the drive to the storage unit, the two men had barely spoken. When Michael asked Bryce about the road trip he and Cordelia had taken, Bryce had replied briefly, saying the drive was fine. Both men remained quiet and distant, showing little interest in starting a conversation. As detectives continued their investigation, they uncovered hints of tension within the family. Michael admitted that he felt uneasy around Bryce and was hesitant to spend time with him. This raised questions about why Michael had agreed to help Bryce with the storage unit in the first place, especially without Cordelia being there. Cordelia later explained that she had stayed home that day because she was too exhausted from the long road trip and needed to rest. From Michael's perspective, the trip to the storage unit had been routine until it was interrupted by the strange and unsettling encounter. He speculated that the events might be tied to some kind of trouble Bryce had gotten himself into, especially since Bryce had just returned to town after a lengthy road trip across the United States. Michael wasn't convinced. The mention of Arizona nagged at him. It was too specific to ignore. He pressed Cordelia further, asking why Bryce would be connected to Arizona or why it was relevant to his sudden disappearance. Cordelia hesitated, her eyes darting away as she stammered that it was nothing, just a passing mention. But Michael noticed the tremor in her voice and the way her hands fidgeted nervously. "You're hiding something," Michael said gently but firmly. "Cordelia, if you know anything about this, you have to tell me. This isn't just about Bryce, it could be about your safety too." Cordelia froze for a moment before lowering her gaze. "Complicated," she muttered. Michael's patience was wearing thin, but he resisted the urge to raise his voice. "I don't care how complicated it is. Tell me what's going on." Finally, Cordelia relented. "There was someone we met on the road in Arizona," Bryce got involved. She began hesitantly. Involved in what, Michael asked, his heart sinking as he prepared for the worst. She shook her head. "I don't know everything, Dad. It was just supposed to be a simple deal. Some guy approached Bryce when we were at a diner, said he needed someone to deliver a package. Bryce thought it would be easy money. We were running low on cash and I didn't think it was a big deal." Michael felt his stomach twist. "What kind of package?" Cordelia's voice dropped to a whisper. "I don't know. He wouldn't tell me and Bryce wouldn't let me see it. He just said it wasn't a big deal, that we drop it off and be done with it. But after that, things started happening. People started following us, leaving notes on the car. Bryce said he could handle it, but I was scared. That I wanted to come home, but he insisted we finish the trip." Michael's mind raced. "And when you came home early, was it because of this?" Cordelia nodded slowly. "Something happened. Bryce didn't tell me everything, but he said we had to leave right away." He looked terrified. Michael's instincts told him they were in over their heads. If Bryce had gotten tangled up in something illegal, it could explain his disappearance. But there was still so much Cordelia wasn't saying or didn't know. "Did you ever see the man again? The one who gave Bryce the package?" Cordelia shook her head. "No, but Bryce got a call from someone after we got home. I don't know who it was. But after that, he started acting even stranger. Michael exhaled, his mind piecing together fragments of a puzzle that still didn't make sense. Whoever Bryce had gotten involved with, it wasn't over. Okay, Michael said, trying to steady his voice. We're gonna figure this out. But you have to tell me everything, Cordelia. No more hiding things, no matter how bad they seem. Cordelia nodded, her eyes glistening with tears. I'm sorry, Dad. I didn't mean for any of this to happen. As Michael embraced his daughter, he couldn't shake the feeling that they were both standing at the edge of something far darker than they had imagined. And for Bryce, wherever he was, time might be running out. Michael's mind raced as he processed Cordelia's revelation. Washington, what were you doing there? Cordelia hesitated, her hands fidgeting nervously. Bryce wanted to meet someone there, she said. He said it was important, something about tying up loose ends. I didn't ask too many questions because, well, he wasn't in the mood to explain. Do you remember where in Washington, who he was meeting? Michael pressed, his voice tight with concern. I don't know exactly, Cordelia admitted. It was somewhere near Seattle. The guy seemed off. Bryce called him Jack, but I don't think that was his real name. Michael leaned forward, trying to piece together the fragments of information. Did you meet this Jack? What did he want? Cordelia nodded reluctantly. I saw him once. He was older, maybe in his late 40s or 50s. He gave Bryce something, a small package. Bryce told me to wait in the car while they talked. He didn't want me involved. Did Bryce ever tell you what was in the package? Michael asked. No, Cordelia said, her voice trembling. But after that meeting, Bryce started acting even more paranoid. He kept checking his phone, looking over his shoulder, and talking about people following us. Michael's heart sank. Whatever Bryce had gotten involved in, it was serious. He realized that his daughter might be in more danger than she realized. Did Bryce ever say why he was so worried? Or what these people wanted? Cordelia shook her head. Not really. He just said that we needed to lay low and stay out of sight for a while. Michael stood up and began pacing the room. Cordelia, this is bigger than just Bryce disappearing. If he was involved with dangerous people, they might come after you too. We need to go to the police and tell them everything you know. Cordelia's eyes widened in fear. No, we can't do that, Dad. Bryce said they would kill us if we talked to anyone. Michael stopped in his tracks, his chest tightening. He knelt in front of his daughter, gripping her shoulders gently. Listen to me, Cordelia. Keeping quiet isn't going to protect you. If these people are as dangerous as Bryce thought, they won't stop just because you stay silent. We need help. Cordelia hesitated, tears streaming down her face. I'm scared, Dad. I don't know what to do. Michael pulled her into a tight embrace. We'll figure this out together. But I need you to trust me. Okay? We'll find a way to keep you safe. As he held his daughter, Michael resolved to get to the bottom of the mystery, no matter the cost. Bryce's disappearance was just the beginning. Whatever secrets had been buried during their travels, Michael was determined to uncover them before it was too late. The tension was palpable as the investigation progressed. Michael, though cooperative, found himself increasingly under scrutiny. Investigators began to notice inconsistencies in his timeline, which only added to the air of suspicion surrounding the case. Cordelia, for her part, seemed trapped in a web of fear and loyalty. She admitted to the controlling nature of her relationship with Bryce, but still appeared reluctant to speak ill of him outright. Her hesitance frustrated both her father and the authorities. I don't understand, Michael confided to the lead detective one evening. I just want to help my daughter, but she's hiding something. Bryce's disappearance feels like a piece of a much larger puzzle. The detective nodded. That's what we're trying to figure out, Mr. Howard. But we need complete transparency from everyone involved. A new development. Just when it seemed the case had stalled, the police received a tip from a motel owner in Flagstaff, Arizona. The owner recognized Bryce and Cordelia from a photo circulated by investigators. He claimed they had stayed there for 3 nights about 2 weeks prior to Bryce's disappearance. The motel records confirmed that they had checked in under fake names and paid in cash. Surveillance footage showed Bryce frequently leaving their room late at night, sometimes returning with small packages. When confronted with this information, Cordelia broke down. Bryce was in trouble, she admitted tearfully. He owed money to people, dangerous people. That's why we were in Arizona. He said he needed to settle a debt. Debt? For what? Michael asked, his voice trembling. I don't know exactly, Cordelia replied, but he was desperate. He said if he didn't pay, they'd come after us. The revelation sent chills through Michael. It confirmed his worst fears that Bryce's disappearance was tied to something criminal. The missing phones. Investigators focused on tracking down Bryce's and Cordelia's phones, hoping they held vital information. After days of searching, they located one of Bryce's smartphones at a porn shop in Flagstaff. The device had been wiped clean, but forensic experts managed to recover fragments of data. Among the recovered messages was an exchange with a contact saved as J. The messages were cryptic, but hinted at a deal gone wrong. Phrases like running out of time and they want more than we agreed painted a grim picture. The storage unit. Attention shifted back to the storage unit where Bryce was last seen. A thorough search revealed a hidden compartment in one of the walls. Inside, police found a burner phone and a small stash of cash. The burner phone contained a single unsent message. I'm out. Can't do this anymore. If you come near her, I'll make sure everyone knows. The message was time-stamped just hours before Bryce's disappearance. The unraveling. As the pieces of the puzzle came together, a troubling narrative emerged. Bryce appeared to be entangled in a smuggling operation, likely involving drugs or illegal goods. His sudden disappearance suggested he had either tried to back out of the arrangement or had been silenced. Cordelia, despite her loyalty to Bryce, seemed to be an unwitting accomplice. Her fear and evasiveness made sense in light of the danger they were in. Michael, meanwhile, remained determined to protect his daughter. But as he reflected on the events leading up to Bryce's disappearance, he couldn't shake the feeling that something or someone was still missing from the story. The deeper the investigation went, the more it revealed the entangled history between the Elix family and the tragic events surrounding Bryce and Cordelia. As authorities unraveled more details, it became clear that the relationship between father and daughter had a significant impact on the unfolding situation. Family dynamics and tensions. Michael's tight control over Cordelia's life was a growing point of concern. His mistrust of her choices, and especially his dislike for Bryce, painted a clearer picture of why Cordelia had been so eager to escape on her cross-country trip. While it had initially seemed like an innocent adventure, it was clear that the road trip served as an escape from the mounting pressures and tension at home. Cordelia's family dynamics were complex. Her mother's battle with Huntington's disease, combined with the challenges faced by her younger sibling, had created an already volatile household. But Michael's behavior, specifically his relentless pressure on Cordelia, had pushed her further away. Hiring a private investigator to follow her ex-boyfriend was just one example of the lengths Michael went to, showing how deep his mistrust ran. Investigators began to suspect that Michael's influence over his daughter had more to do with the conflict than Cordelia was willing to admit. She had wanted to break free, but in doing so, she had connected herself to Bryce, whose own life was full of uncertainties and struggles. Michael's admission it wasn't until investigators confronted Michael about Bryce's phone that the truth started to come out. Initially, Michael denied any involvement with the phone, claiming he had never handled it. But after further questioning, he admitted that he had taken the phone from the car and disposed of it in a gas station trash bin in Brainerd the same evening Bryce disappeared. His reasoning was that he wanted to protect Cordelia from being tracked by whoever was behind Bryce's disappearance. The admission was a significant moment in the investigation. Michael had gone to great lengths to shield his daughter from what he believed was an even darker situation. But the authorities now wondered, was he protecting her, or was he concealing something more troubling? Bryce the Dreamer with a hidden life. Bryce Bruegel's background also added more layers to the investigation. Born in Brainerd in 1999, Bryce had always been a dreamer. At 23, he had aspirations of building a homestead in Alaska, hoping to live off the land and create a self-sufficient life. His relationship with Cordelia had started in February 2022, and the two had bonded over their shared love for adventure and the outdoors. Their trip across the country had been meant to give them the freedom they longed for, but as the investigation revealed, Their relationship wasn't as idyllic as it seemed. While Bryce had envisioned a simple life, free of the constraints of society, he was also entangled in a world of danger and secrecy. His ties to people who could be dangerous were becoming clearer, and it appeared that his disappearance wasn't an accident. It was part of a larger, more sinister story. The search for truth as Michael's actions and the details of Cordelia's life began to surface. It became evident that there were more questions than answers. Was Michael's overbearing control over his daughter a catalyst for her getting involved with Bryce? Or had something darker been happening between them during their travels? Was Bryce's disappearance truly the result of a criminal operation? Or was it an elaborate ruse to disappear under the radar? As Cordelia clung to Bryce despite everything, the true nature of their relationship and the secrets they had been hiding began to emerge. And with each new piece of information, the authorities were no closer to understanding whether Bryce had been taken, or whether he had simply vanished on his own accord. As investigators dug deeper into Michael's past, his history with the law became an unsettling part of the investigation. His previous legal issues raised questions about his behavior and mindset. The revelation that Michael had been convicted of a crime involving a mentally incapacitated adult in 2018 raised doubts about his motivations and his sense of control in sensitive situations. This new information painted a complicated picture of Michael as a man with a troubled past and a tendency to act out of fear or anger. Despite Michael's attempts to explain his actions, his conflicting statements and inconsistencies had investigators questioning whether his motives were purely protective, or whether there was more to his involvement in Bryce's disappearance than he was letting on. Michael's anguish and helplessness were real, but his desire to protect his daughter might have clouded his judgment, leading him to make decisions that only complicated the investigation further. The strained relationship between Cordelia and Bryce was also critical in understanding what had happened. Michael's suspicions about Bryce's controlling behavior were not unfounded. He had witnessed firsthand how Bryce seemed to dominate every aspect of Cordelia's life, from monitoring her phone activity to manipulating her emotions. Michael had seen his daughter become increasingly withdrawn and submissive, which triggered his desire to intervene. However, his intervention, at least as far as investigators were concerned, seemed to have crossed a line between protection and control. As investigators continued to piece together the story, they found themselves questioning not only the events surrounding Bryce's disappearance, but also Michael's role in the family's turmoil. His background, his strained relationship with his daughter, and his increasingly erratic actions were beginning to paint a picture of a man who might have had more to do with the situation than he was willing to admit. Cordelia, for her part, remained conflicted and torn. On one hand, she loved Bryce and seemed to feel deeply connected to him, but on the other, she had witnessed the destructive dynamics of their relationship and felt trapped between the man she loved and her protective father. She found herself caught in a web of guilt, fear, and confusion, unsure of who to trust or what actions to take. But the more he spoke, the more his words seemed to raise doubts about his true role in the events surrounding Bryce's disappearance. Michael's repeated insistence on protecting his family and his strong emotions about Bryce's behavior added layers to the investigation. Despite passing the polygraph tests, investigators remained skeptical, knowing that polygraphs were not definitive proof of innocence. Michael's credibility was now under scrutiny, not just because of his personal history, but also because of his contradictory statements and behavior. The tense atmosphere during the interrogations was palpable. Michael's frustration grew as the investigators pressed him for answers, but he held his ground. He argued that while he had been angry with Bryce, his actions had never been meant to harm him. However, his words were sometimes at odds with the actions he had taken. Throwing away Bryce's phone and expressing a desire to scare him off were not the actions of a passive bystander. These inconsistencies painted a picture of someone who might have been acting out of fear, but also out of a desire to control the situation. The fact that Michael had confronted Bryce multiple times about the bruises on Cordelia's face added to the complexity. He claimed that he had warned Bryce that any further harm to his daughter would result in consequences. But was this really an act of protection, or was it driven by something deeper, like a need for control over Cordelia's choices? Investigators were not convinced by Michael's explanations, especially since he kept referring to Bryce in the past tense, as if he had already accepted Bryce's disappearance as a fait accompli. His continued focus on his daughter's relationship with Bryce was not lost on the investigators, who now had to consider whether Michael was involved in a more direct way than he had let on. Michael Ilitch's controlling relationship with his daughter Cordelia and his growing mistrust of her boyfriend, Bryce Bogle, set the stage for a tragic and violent crime. Concerned for Cordelia's well-being and fueled by suspicions of abuse, Michael's protective instincts transformed into frustration and anger. This led him to confront Bryce at his storage unit, where an argument turned fatal. Michael shot Bryce in the back of the head, claiming it was an impulsive act to protect his daughter. However, the evidence painted a darker picture. Investigators uncovered forensic evidence and testimony revealing a premeditated plan. Michael had previously threatened Bryce and told others he intended to kill him. A bleach bottle found in the storage unit contained both Bryce's and Michael's DNA, while a sled used to move Bryce's body was discovered with traces of blood. Phone records showed Michael's movements from the storage unit to a remote area near Edward Lake, where Bryce's body was eventually found buried. Despite Michael's claims of acting out of fear for Cordelia's safety, the jury found him guilty of first-degree murder. Testimonies revealed Michael's long-standing animosity toward Bryce and his belief that killing him was the only way to protect Cordelia, even though she denied any abuse. In April 2024, Michael was sentenced to life in prison without parole. The case highlights the destructive power of fear, mistrust, and unresolved conflict, which led to the loss of a young man's life and the irreversible fracture of a family. It serves as a sobering reminder of the importance of addressing concerns through understanding and open communication, rather than resorting to violence. Story 2. Imagine going through life thinking you truly know the people closest to you, only to discover they've been hiding a dark secret for 25 years. Family secrets can shape us in ways we don't even realize, sometimes holding us back from true happiness. When the truth finally comes out, it can feel like your entire world is falling apart in an instant. I believe trusting someone's words after so many years is a risky gamble. It's hard to imagine living alongside someone, knowing their dark secrets, and keeping quiet. Were there personal motives involved? Let's dive into this story together. Today we're uncovering a chilling tale of love, betrayal, and a mystery that tangled itself around unsolved crimes in Holland, Michigan. The events were so shocking that every resident had their own theory about what could have happened. It took investigators years to finally bring a suspect to trial, but was just as truly served. Gail Wingarden was born on April 24, 1965, to Wendell and Dorothy Wingarden as the eighth child in a large, close-knit family in Ottawa County, Michigan. Though they didn't have much money, the Wingardens were known for their strong family bonds and the care they showed for each other. They embodied the meaning of a loving and united family. Despite their warmth, financial struggles were common, and from a young age, Gail dreamed of a career that would allow her to afford the things every child wishes for. She saved money and confided in her older sister, Cheryl, that she planned to work hard so she'd never have to go without. As a teenager, Gail got her first job as a waitress. The pay wasn't much, but tips helped her earn decent money. Her warm, friendly, and charming nature meant she left a lasting impression on everyone she met. At 18, Gail experienced her first true love. The relationship moved quickly, and the young couple moved in together, dreaming of building a home and starting a family. They lived together for about a year. In 1984, when Gail was 19, she began a new job where she met a 25-year-old contractor named Rick Brink. For Gail, it was love at first sight. She ended her previous relationship and poured her heart into her new romance with Rick. What unfolded next would shake the foundations of her life and the peaceful town of Holland, Michigan. Rick was so taken by Gail that on the very day they met, he told his mom he had found the woman he wanted to marry. He was head over heels, and their relationship quickly blossomed into something special. They spent their days going on romantic dates and outings, with Rick going above and beyond to make Gail happy. Deeply in love, they seemed like the perfect match, hardworking, ambitious, and full of energy. They shared the same dreams of building a future together, working hard, and one day raising a family in their dream home. One summer, The couple visited Rick's family lake house on Lake Michigan, where he had a boat. Gail tried water skiing, and everyone who saw them together agreed they looked like the perfect couple. On April 25, 1986, just one day before Gail's birthday, they got married in a small church ceremony surrounded by family and friends. Rick's father, Garrett Brink, helped them find the home they had been dreaming of, a charming old house on 20 acres of land on Ransom Street, just outside their hometown of Holland, Michigan. Garrett managed to secure a great deal, and the newlyweds were excited to start renovations. Rick, a skilled handyman who worked for a furniture company and trained carpenters, took on the challenge of transforming the house. By October 1987, they moved into the partially renovated home, documenting their progress on video as they cleaned, painted, tore down walls, and repaired floors. The once dated house was slowly coming back to life. Gail even told her sister that their next project would be a nursery, as they were ready to start a family. On November 21, 1987, Rick and Gail attended the wedding of one of Rick's high friends. They had a wonderful time, but the next day, something strange happened. Neither of them showed up for work. Rick, who worked for Trenway, a major furniture company, was known for his reliability. His absence was completely out of character. Concerned, Rick's supervisor called their home, but no one answered. Growing worried, he contacted Rick's parents to see if they knew why Rick hadn't come to work. Rick's parents were equally alarmed. They knew their son wouldn't disappear without a word, and fear for the couple's safety began to set in. Something was clearly wrong. Rick's parents, growing more concerned, decided to call Gail's workplace to check on her. They discovered that she hadn't shown up either. Alarmed, they rushed to Rick and Gail's house to see if everything was okay. When they arrived, they immediately noticed Rick's car parked in the driveway, feeling a glimmer of relief. They hoped the couple was just at home, perhaps unwell or sleeping in. But as they approached the car, they saw something unusual. Rick was inside, sitting in an awkward position. His knees were on the floor beneath the steering wheel, his body hunched over and leaning toward the passenger seat, with his head resting against the passenger side door. Rick's father, Garrett, moved closer and called out his son's name, but there was no response. When Garrett tapped Rick's shoulder, he realized his son was unresponsive, and then he saw the blood on Rick's head. Overcome with horror, Rick's parents didn't enter the house, fearing what else they might find. Instead, they immediately called the Ottawa County Sheriff's Department. When deputies arrived, they searched the house. Inside the bedroom, they found Gail. At first glance, it seemed as though she was simply sleeping with a pillow over her face. But when the officers lifted the pillow, they saw it was stained with blood. Gail had been shot 3 times at close range. More officers soon arrived to begin a thorough investigation of the scene. Detectives carefully combed through the house, searching for clues or evidence that might point to what had happened. The initial theory was that Rick might have harmed Gail and then, overcome with guilt, taken his own life. But this idea quickly fell apart when they searched Rick's car. There was no weapon to be found, nor was there any evidence linking him to an attack on his wife. In a single day, the couple's storybook romance filled with dreams of a bright future had ended in unimaginable tragedy. Both Rick and Gail were gone. Their love story transformed into a nightmare. Yet, there was no clear motive, no suspect, and no explanation for the violence that had shattered their lives. The investigation pressed on, and the weapon used in the crime was identified as a .22 caliber revolver. Rick had sustained fatal injuries from 2 close-range gunshots to the head. Investigators also found a bullet hole in the passenger side window of Rick's car, which was shattered. The driver's side window was partially rolled down, leading authorities to believe that Rick had willingly lowered it to speak with someone he likely knew and trusted, as there were no immediate signs of danger. Inside the house, there were no signs of a robbery or forced entry. The door was intact, and the house remained undisturbed. Nothing was stolen or ransacked. Rick and Gail's wallets were on the kitchen table, untouched, with cash and credit cards inside. Their wedding rings were still on their fingers, and scattered jewelry in the house was left untouched. The lack of shell casings and the fact that the bullets remained lodged in the victims suggested that the perpetrator had come with a singular purpose to take their lives. The physical evidence was sparse. 6 fingerprints were found in the house, 4 belonging to Rick and Gail, while the remaining 2 couldn't be matched to any known records in law enforcement databases. Investigators determined that the murders occurred in the early hours of November 22nd, just hours after Rick and Gail were last seen leaving a wedding reception at around 11 p.m. on November 21st. Despite the scarcity of physical evidence, rumors and speculations swirled throughout the community. However, not everyone with suspicions was forthcoming, and investigators found it challenging to gather actionable leads. No arrests were made, and no suspects were identified. To trace the couple's final hours, detectives began questioning friends, family, and co-workers. One of the first people they spoke with was Gail's brother, Ryan Wingarden. He revealed that Gail's ex-boyfriend had confronted her publicly, professing that he still loved her and was jealous of her relationship with Rick. According to Ryan, the ex-boyfriend had even tried to persuade Gail to leave Rick and return to him. This revelation added a layer of intrigue to the case, but without concrete evidence, it remained a lead that investigators couldn't immediately act on. The mystery deepened as the town of Holland, Michigan, continued to reel from the shocking tragedy. Gail was happily married, and despite the ex-boyfriend's feelings, she had moved on. Police tracked him down and brought him in for questioning. He denied any involvement, willingly took a polygraph test which he passed, and provided a solid alibi. With no evidence linking him to the crime, authorities ruled him out as a suspect. A few days into the investigation, another lead surfaced. The previous owner of Rick and Gail's house came forward with an intriguing theory. He suggested that the crime might have been a case of mistaken identity, that the perpetrator could have been targeting him instead, unaware he no longer lived there. This former owner, known by the nickname Shotgun, had a complicated past. He was once affiliated with a motorcycle club and had been involved in trafficking banned substances and weapons. However, Shotgun had turned informant, working with federal agents after he opposed the sale of illegal substances to teenagers. He provided information on criminal activities within certain groups. Detectives pursued this lead thoroughly. They interviewed other informants, questioned members of motorcycle clubs in Detroit, and tried to connect the dots. Despite their efforts, no evidence emerged linking these groups to the double homicide of Gail and Rick. After about a month, this theory was dismissed due to a lack of substantial proof. Then, on Christmas Eve, a shocking new development occurred. Another violent crime was reported near Brink's home. Deborah Wilson, a local woman, was found dead in her backyard, having suffered a fatal neck injury. Investigators soon discovered that Deborah and Gail had attended the same high school, were in the same graduating class, and shared overlapping social circles. This chilling coincidence raised immediate suspicions that the two crimes might be connected. The small town of Holland, Michigan, was gripped by fear. Residents were on edge, speculating whether the same perpetrator could be responsible and wondering if more victims would follow. The senselessness of the crimes cast a shadow over the once peaceful community, leaving everyone on high alert. That Gail's brother, Ryan Wingarden, had behaved strangely after the murders. Cheryl and her aunt revealed that Ryan seemed unusually nervous and avoided discussing the tragedy altogether. Over the years, his evasive behavior had raised suspicions within the family. Detectives decided to take a closer look at Ryan. They began questioning other family members and acquaintances who had interacted with him around the time of the murders. Several noted that Ryan's demeanor had changed drastically after Gail and Rick's deaths. Some described him as withdrawn and secretive, while others mentioned moments where he seemed overly defensive when the topic of the murders came up. The detectives found it curious that Ryan had never been formally interrogated during the original investigation. To better understand his potential involvement, they started piecing together his movements and behavior from that time. Through their interviews, the detectives learned of an incident where Ryan reportedly confided in someone close to him. He had allegedly shared chilling details about the murders, details that were never made public. This revelation gave detectives enough cause to bring Ryan in for questioning. In early 2013, investigators approached Ryan Weingarten and asked him to recount his version of events from November 1987. Ryan's story was vague, inconsistent, and riddled with contradictions. When confronted with evidence and witness statements, Ryan began to falter. Detectives then focused on building a psychological profile and gathering corroborating evidence. They uncovered allegations that Ryan had a strained relationship with Gail, stemming from unresolved jealousy and resentment. Some family members even suggested that Ryan had been possessive and controlling toward his younger sister. After months of interviews and analysis, the detectives believed they had enough evidence to proceed. In early 2014, Ryan Weingarten was arrested and charged with the murders of Rick and Gail Brink. The case that had remained cold for nearly 25 years was finally brought to trial. Prosecutors argued that Ryan had acted out of jealousy and anger, unable to accept Gail's happiness and her life with Rick. The defense, on the other hand, claimed there was no physical evidence tying Ryan to the crime scene. The trial brought the family's long-buried pain to the surface, as dark secrets were exposed and relationships were tested. It was a shocking and emotional journey for everyone involved. During the January 15th interview, Pam's account shifted in a startling way. She began to unravel under the pressure of questioning and confessed that Ryan had told her he was involved in the murders of Rick and Gail Brink. According to Pam, Ryan confided in her shortly after the crime but swore her to secrecy, saying they needed to protect each other and their future. Pam described how Ryan had admitted to shooting both Gail and Rick. She explained that he had been angry and jealous, feelings that had festered for years. Ryan was particularly resentful of Gail's seemingly happy and successful life with Rick, and the argument over their parents' camper had been the breaking point. Investigators were stunned by Pam's confession but knew they needed more evidence to solidify their case. They pressed her for further details, and she revealed chilling specifics about the murder's details that were never publicly disclosed. Pam said Ryan described how he waited for Rick and Gail to return home from the wedding, ambushing them when they least expected it. Detectives also revisited forensic evidence from the crime scene. Though technology had advanced significantly since 1987, the limited physical evidence available did not directly implicate Ryan. Still, Pam's confession was enough to push the investigation forward. On January 29, 2013, Ryan Weingarten was arrested and charged with 2 counts of first-degree murder. The case against him relied heavily on Pam's testimony and the pattern of suspicious behavior he had exhibited over the years. The trial began later that year and drew widespread attention, especially in Holland, Michigan, where the community had long sought closure. Prosecutors argued that Ryan's jealousy, anger, and inability to control his emotions led him to commit the murders. They highlighted Pam's testimony, framing it as the key to unlocking a decades-old mystery. Ryan's defense team attempted to discredit Pam, suggesting her testimony was coerced and that her changing stories made her unreliable. They also pointed to the lack of physical evidence tying Ryan directly to the crime scene. In March 2014, after weeks of emotional testimony and deliberation, the jury found Ryan Weingarten guilty of the murders of Rick and Gail Brink. He was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole, bringing a long-awaited sense of justice to the families and the community. Though justice was served, the case left behind a trail of heartbreak, revealing the devastating impact of jealousy, unresolved anger, and hidden secrets within a family. During Ryan's trial, the prosecution painted a picture of a man consumed by jealousy, anger, and unresolved family issues. They argued that Ryan's deep resentment toward Gail, combined with fears that she might reveal their disturbing past, led him to murder his sister and her husband in cold blood. Pam's testimony was central to the case, as it provided chilling details about the events surrounding the crime. Pam recounted how Ryan had admitted to the murders and even brought her to the scene the day after the crime, where she saw the bodies of Rick and Gail. She also testified about the years of threats and emotional manipulation she endured, which kept her from coming forward earlier. The prosecution highlighted her fear in Ryan's to control her as evidence of his violent and coercive nature. Other witnesses, including Ryan's aunt and sister Cheryl, testified about his strange behavior and incriminating comments over the years. Cheryl recalled instances when Ryan had made unsettling remarks about the crime, including wondering aloud if he could have been responsible. The prosecution argued that these statements demonstrated Ryan's guilt and inability to fully conceal his involvement. Ryan's defense team attempted to counter these accusations by discrediting Pam's testimony. They argued that her changing story and years of silence made her unreliable. They also claimed that the lack of physical evidence directly tying Ryan to the crime scene created reasonable doubt. However, the prosecution emphasized that Pam's detailed confession included information that had never been made public, such as the specific positions of the bodies and other details from the crime scene. This, they argued, lent credibility to her account. Ryan's testimony in his own defense proved to be one of the most shocking moments of the trial. His admission of inappropriate interactions with Gail during their teenage years, described as consensual curiosity, horrified many in the courtroom. The prosecution seized on this testimony to argue that Ryan's complicated and toxic relationship with Gail played a role in his motivation for the murders. After weeks of testimony and deliberation, the jury found Ryan Wingarden guilty of 2 counts of first-degree murder. He was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole, bringing an end to a case that had haunted the community for decades. The trial not only provided justice for Rick and Gail Brink, but also unearthed long-buried family secrets, leaving those who knew the Wingarden family reeling. For many, the verdict offered a sense of closure, but the revelations about the dark and twisted dynamics within the family ensured that the legacy of the case would not soon be forgotten. The defense also sought to discredit Pam's testimony, suggesting that her decision to come forward after so many years was motivated by personal issues or ulterior motives. They questioned why she had kept silent for over 2 decades and argued that her delayed confession cast doubt on her credibility. By focusing on the lack of physical evidence linking Ryan to the crime, they attempted to portray him as a victim of false accusations and family drama rather than a cold-blooded murderer. Despite these defense arguments, the prosecution's case remained compelling. They emphasized Ryan's suspicious behavior in the days following the crime, particularly his early knowledge of the murders before they were publicly discovered. Jim Meehan's testimony about Ryan mentioning the deaths of Rick and Gail before their bodies were found was a critical moment that left a strong impression on the jury. The prosecution argued that this knowledge could only have come from the person responsible for the crime. As the trial progressed, the jury considered both sides of the case. They deliberated for just 4 hours before reaching a unanimous verdict guilty on 2 counts of first-degree murder for the deaths of Rick and Gail Brink. This swift decision was a testament to the strength of the prosecution's case and the impact of Pam's testimony. In the aftermath of the verdict, the Brink family and the community experienced a mix of relief and sadness. While justice had been served, the revelation of Ryan's involvement in the murders left many in shock, particularly those who had known him for years. The trial had unearthed deeply troubling family secrets, and the fact that Ryan had been able to hide his dark actions for so long added a layer of disbelief to the case. Ryan's sentencing followed shortly after the verdict. Judge John Holling sentenced him to 2 consecutive life terms without the possibility of parole, condemning him for the cruelty of his actions. In his statement, the judge called the crime cold-blooded and expressed the deep harm caused to the victims and their families. Despite his conviction, Ryan continued to maintain his innocence, refusing to accept responsibility for the deaths of his sister and her husband. His refusal to admit guilt further alienated his family, who had hoped for a sense of closure after years of uncertainty. As the years passed, the case became a chilling reminder of the secrets that confess to within families and how those secrets can lead to devastating consequences. The investigation and trial revealed the dark and disturbing truths behind the deaths of Rick and Gail Brink, offering some measure of justice but also leaving a lasting scar on everyone involved. Pam's testimony played a central role in the prosecution's case, but the defense focused on undermining her credibility, especially due to the 25 years that had passed before she came forward with her confession. The defense argued that her statements were the result of pressure or manipulation by the police and that the lack of physical evidence, such as the murder weapon or any fingerprints, meant the case against Ryan was based solely on speculation. Despite these challenges, the prosecution countered that the nature of the crime, personal and brutal, pointed to Ryan as the perpetrator. The fact that both victims had been shot in the head at close range suggested an intimate knowledge of the victims, something that would not be typical in a random attack. Moreover, the early knowledge Ryan displayed about the crime, particularly mentioning the deaths before the bodies were discovered, provided additional circumstantial evidence that tied him to the murders. The case was complicated by the passage of time. It's difficult for juries to make decisions based on decades-old evidence, and the lack of forensic evidence left gaps in the narrative. But ultimately, the jury convicted Ryan, and he was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. In 2015, Ryan's legal team filed an appeal attempting to have his conviction overturned or to secure a new trial. They argued that the prosecution's case relied too heavily on Pam's testimony and that the jury had not been given access to her earlier police interviews, where they believed she had been influenced by investigators. The defense maintained that the only evidence against Ryan was her word and that without it, there would have been no case. However, the court upheld the conviction, citing the compelling nature of the circumstantial evidence, especially the timeline and Ryan's behavior before the bodies were discovered. The jury's decision was not solely based on motive, but also on the totality of the evidence which, even if circumstantial, painted a clear picture of Ryan's guilt. As of now, Ryan remains in prison, maintaining his innocence despite the overwhelming evidence against him. The case is a reminder of the complex dynamics within families, the dark secrets that can be hidden for years, and the difficulty of long unsolved crimes to justice. While the families of Rick and Gail Brink may never fully understand why this tragedy occurred, the conviction provided them with a sense of closure, and the legal system ultimately fulfilled its role in holding Ryan Weingarten accountable for his actions. Story 3. Financial struggles can happen to anyone. Some people are able to overcome their difficulties quickly, while others might struggle for years. How someone handles these challenges is really important. Some people work hard, earning money through honest jobs, while others turn to crime for a fast way out. There's also a third group of people who choose to create controversial adult content, hoping to make a lot of money. While this kind of work isn't illegal, people in this industry, especially actresses, often face harsh criticism and judgment from society. Still, the promise of quick wealth and fame can sometimes make people overlook their moral values. Many of these individuals now work from home, setting up studios and doing live broadcasts. However, it's important to remember the serious emotional toll this work can have, often leading to heartbreaking consequences. The story of Carol Maley, a young mother and film actress, is a sad example of what can happen when someone chases fame and money in this industry. Carol didn't see her work as immoral. She was just trying to gain financial independence, planning to retire once she had enough to support herself and her young son. Sadly, she was never able to leave the industry, and her once admired body was tragically found dismembered on a rocky cliff. Let's take a closer look at Carol's early life. Carol Nicole Maley was born on September 19, 1995, in a small Italian province. She was the only child of her parents, Fabio and Josephine. Carol had Italian roots from her mother and Dutch heritage from her father. When she was just 4 years old, her parents divorced. She stayed with her mother while her father moved back to the Netherlands, remarried, and had more children. Josephine decided to stay in Italy and raise Carol on her own, as her ex-husband provided little support. They lived in a small town called Sesto Kenda in the province of Vai. Josephine worked several jobs to give Carol the best education and a better future. Carol grew up to be a beautiful, kind, and sociable young woman with many friends. She easily connected with people and had a natural charm. As a schoolgirl, she was very active, participating in sports, especially horseback riding, and also attended a dance studio. Carol was fluent in 3 languages, loved traveling across Europe, and enjoyed reading, allowing her to engage in conversations on almost any topic. As a teenager, she blossomed into a true beauty with a slim, feminine figure, attracting many admirers. She loved being the center of attention. After finishing school, Carol decided to pursue higher education and enrolled in a technical university to study industrial design, arts, and fashion. She quickly became one of the top students in her class, excelling in her studies. However, her life took an unexpected turn during her freshman year, an unexpected pregnancy. In 2020, When Carol was 20 years old, she developed a romantic relationship with a young man, a year older than her, who was studying architecture and design. In the fall of that year, Carol discovered that she was pregnant. The news shocked both her and the father, as they were both still students and unprepared for this life-changing event. Despite the surprise, Carol made the firm decision to keep the baby. In 2016, she and her boyfriend had a son, and their lives changed dramatically. They both had to leave school because they couldn't afford to support themselves and their newborn. They decided to move to Verona, hoping to find better opportunities to earn a living and take care of their new family. Carol took a job as a sales consultant at a large cosmetics and perfume retail chain. Shortly after their son turned 1, her boyfriend worked on various projects from home while also taking care of their child. New love in mid-2019, Carol unexpectedly fell in love with another man named Angelo. They started a passionate affair, secretly meeting for about 6 months. The couple rented hotel rooms, exchanged messages late at night, and tried to spend every free moment together. However, just before the new year, the father of Carol's child found out about the affair. Feeling betrayed, he decided to end his relationship with Carol, leaving her to face the consequences of her actions. Maylee believed that breaking up with her boyfriend was for the best, especially since she had already planned to leave him for her new boyfriend, Angelo. However, a new problem quickly arose. Angelo lived with his parents, and Carol couldn't move there with her child from her previous relationship. They decided to rent an apartment together, but then the coronavirus pandemic hit, and the young couple found themselves jobless and unable to afford their own place. In the end, Carol moved into Angelo's parents' house. She made the difficult decision to leave her 4-year-old son with his biological father temporarily, hoping the situation would improve so she could bring him to live with her. Unfortunately, things continued to worsen as a widespread self-isolation order was put in place. Everyone was confined to their homes, and Carol faced severe financial struggles during this challenging time. Angelo and his parents did their best to support her, but Carol could not contribute financially to her son's care. To make matters worse, Carol's mother was diagnosed with Parkinson's disease, and her condition worsened quickly. The medical costs for her mother's treatment added to Carol's financial burdens. Faced with this difficult situation, Carol realized she needed to find a way to earn money from home, an unexpected source of income. During the lockdown, Carol desperately searched for ways to support her son and her sick mother. She considered using social media and her YouTube channel, sharing her life during isolation and the struggles she was facing. However, her content didn't gain much attention, though her striking appearance did attract some attention. She received compliments from viewers and even some inappropriate proposals in the comments section. One subscriber suggested she try the platform OnlyFans, pointing out that her looks would be appreciated there and she could make money quickly. Carol, feeling desperate, decided to follow the advice. She created an account under the pseudonym Charlotte Angel and began posting revealing content, including intimate photos and short videos. It didn't take long for her to gather a significant following who were willing to pay for her content. This unexpected turn marked the beginning of Carol's new path. Carol quickly began earning well, but she kept the details of how she was making money hidden from her boyfriend and close relatives. She didn't share what she was doing or how much she was being paid. As time went on, her content became more explicit and sophisticated as she worked hard to please her fans. Surprisingly, Carol found that she enjoyed this line of work and became increasingly comfortable with it. She managed to keep her job a secret for about 6 months, but eventually someone she knew discovered her OnlyFans account. Rumors spread quickly and soon everyone knew how she was making a living. Carol wasn't too upset by the gossip. She even tried to defend her choice, claiming that her work was a form of art that brought in good money and fulfilled her needs. However, the conservative views of many in her community, especially in Italy, led to people judging her harshly. Friends and family members gradually distanced themselves, believing that her work was immoral and that associating with her could damage their own reputations. Carol saw this as prejudice and was confident that she would succeed. She believed that she would become wealthy and famous, eventually rising to the status of a well-known adult film star. As her popularity grew, adult film studios began to take serious interest in her. Several directors approached Carol with offers to star in their films, and she eagerly agreed. She participated in group shoots and public performances. When her boyfriend Angelo found out about her work, he was shocked. He had always believed Carol was working remotely as a designer, occasionally going to an office. He felt confused and didn't know how to respond, as he hadn't planned on breaking up with her. However, when his parents learned about the situation, they insisted he end the relationship immediately, fearing that her actions would ruin their family's reputation. By this time, Carol had earned enough money to rent her own apartment. Her OnlyFans account was thriving, and she was receiving regular offers from adult film directors. Her fees for shooting films were increasing as well. In interviews, Carol mentioned that she didn't plan to continue in the adult industry forever. She intended to finish her education and pursue a career as a model. But for the moment, she was enjoying her work and was being well compensated for it. Despite her success, Carol often spoke about the constant moral pressure from those around her. The judgments and attempts to shame her caused emotional stress and psychological trauma. She defended her choices, calling her work art and advocating for every woman's right to choose their own profession without fear of judgment. At 25, Carol began a new chapter in her life. She entered into a relationship with a new partner, someone who took on a dominant role in her life, further complicating her emotional and personal journey. Carol decided to leave her adult film career and work briefly as a sales consultant at a perfume boutique. However, her new path changed when she met 42-year-old banker David Fontana, a photographer specializing in nude styles. They connected online, and their initial meeting sparked a mutual attraction. Though married, David pursued a relationship with Carol, blending their romance with explicit photo sessions. David learned of Carol's past and encouraged her return to adult films, citing her talent. In March 2021, he divorced his wife to live with Carol, supporting her career and co-producing content for OnlyFans, taking a share of the profits. Carol's popularity soared, attracting offers from international studios. While David was jealous in daily life, he treated her work as professional, which she appreciated. Complications arose when Carol's ex, Angelo, reached out, expressing a desire to reconcile. Though Carol declined, they stayed in touch, angering David. His jealousy escalated to threats and an alleged car arson against Angelo. While a restraining order was issued, lack of evidence spared David legal consequences. Carol's career thrived as she traveled internationally, amassing over 30,000 subscribers on OnlyFans. She saved diligently, hoping to buy a home and reunite with her son. Here, Carol planned to leave the adult film industry, find a new job, and focus on raising her son. Meanwhile, she started making custom videos based on fan scripts, which became a lucrative venture. David Fontana continued assisting her with filming and editing, and they still shared a home and profits. In September 2021, Carol met actor Salvatore Galdo on a film set. Their on-screen partnership evolved into a secret romantic relationship. Fearing David's reaction, Carol waited for the right moment to end things with him. By year's end, Salvatore proposed with an engagement ring, and Carol joyfully accepted. Having saved enough money, she bought a home and planned to move in with her son and Salvatore. When she finally told David, he surprisingly accepted the news calmly. They agreed to complete their unfinished, prepaid projects before parting ways for good. The disappearance of Carol in early 2022, Carol vanished. She stopped appearing in films, ceased online streams, and cut communication with colleagues. Most assumed she had quietly exited the industry, as she had planned. However, her disappearance concerned her friends and fiancé. Carol ignored calls but responded to messages, claiming she was fine and needed time to herself. She told Salvatore she had contracted COVID-19 and was self-isolating. This explanation seemed to satisfy him, and no alarms were raised. Her sudden withdrawal from her career and life left everyone puzzled, and the true story of her disappearance remained a mystery. Carol's social media activity became sporadic after her disappearance, with occasional posts and brief interactions. Her last updates included photos from a seaside vacation, shared without informing anyone. Gruesome discovery on March 20, 2022. A passerby near Borno, Italy, noticed black trash bags on a rocky cliffside. Assuming it was discarded garbage, he approached and was horrified to see human fingers protruding from a torn bag. Police arrived to find 4 bags containing a dismembered body divided into 18 parts. Forensic analysis revealed it was a young woman who had died 2 months earlier, and the remains had been frozen before disposal. The body was intentionally mutilated to delay identification. Skin from areas likely covered by tattoos was burned, cut, or doused in acid. Despite this, fragments of the tattoos remained. Investigators matched these pieces to databases but found no local missing person reports fitting the description, raising suspicions that the victim was not from the area. Identification breakthrough: a news broadcast about the unidentified body prompted a response. An adult film actress contacted the police, recognizing the tattoos as belonging to her colleague Carol. This connection shocked the industry and confirmed that the victim was the once popular actress who had mysteriously vanished months earlier. The actress who identified the body explained that the deceased worked under the stage name Charlotte but didn't know her real name. This clue was critical. Once police had a clearer picture of the victim's life, they were able to confirm her real name and identity. Suspicious fiancé: when Carol's identity was revealed, it became public knowledge that she had recently gotten engaged to her colleague, Salvatore Galdo, shortly before disappearing. Strangely, Salvatore had never reported her missing, making him the first suspect. He was detained for questioning. Salvatore appeared devastated by the news of Carol's death and was confused about why he was accused. He provided messages and social media interactions as proof that he had been in contact with her even after her disappearance. According to him, Carol had told him she was isolating after contracting COVID-19, which is why he hadn't visited her. When asked why he didn't call to check on her or help during her illness, Salvatore claimed he had spoken to David Fontana, who assured him he was taking care of her. His story seemed fragmented and unconvincing, but it pointed police to a second suspect. David Fontana's involvement. Police didn't need to look far for David, as he showed up at the station the next day to report someone missing. He seemed unaware that Carol's body had been discovered and identified. When he realized she had been found and the investigation was underway, he panicked. David's nerves betrayed him. His story was inconsistent, and he contradicted himself repeatedly. He claimed that he and Carol had been very close but hadn't seen each other in months. When asked why he was only now reporting her missing, he had no explanation. The truth comes out. Under pressure from investigators, David finally confessed. He claimed Carol's death had been an accident. In early January, David and Carol were filming extreme content for a client who had paid a large sum of money. The script required David to tie her up, tape her mouth shut, put a bag over her head, and pretend to brutally beat and torture her with various tools, including a hammer. They had agreed he wouldn't actually harm her, and she would act as if she were in extreme pain. However, during the session, David claimed he misjudged a hammer blow and accidentally fractured her skull. When he removed the bag from her head, he saw that she was in her death throes. Instead of calling for help, he said he mercifully ended her suffering with another hammer blow. Panicked, David dismembered the body and stored the remains in a freezer for over 2 months before deciding to dispose of them, piecing together the truth. The investigation uncovered a disturbing twist. The so-called client was actually David himself, using a fake account to lure Carol into the session. Investigators believe he planned the entire scenario as revenge after Carol decided to leave him. During the session, David forced Carol to reveal the password to her phone, which he claimed was part of the script. On January 11th, around 9 p.m., he delivered the fatal blow. The following day, he used Carol's credit card to buy a large freezer, as well as a saw and an axe from a hardware store. David then dismembered the body and made deliberate efforts to prevent identification. He removed tattoos by cutting off sections of skin and disfigured other parts of her body to obscure any identifying features. David wasn't done with his attempts to erase evidence. He tried to burn, shred, and completely destroy the remaining pieces of Carol's tattoos and any identifiable features. He then placed the body parts into bags and stored them in the freezer for over 2 months. During this time, David pretended Carol was alive. He communicated with her family and friends through her accounts and managed her social media, posting updates to create the illusion that she was fine. By late March, David believed enough time had passed, and it was safe to dispose of the remains. He took the bags to a remote cliffside, hoping they would either never be found or decompose to the point of being unidentifiable. However, his plan failed. Just 2 days later, the body was discovered, and police tracked him down within a week. Trial and verdict. One of the most shocking aspects of the case was that, for nearly 3 months, no one had reported Carol missing. Her family, friends, and even her fiancé accepted the social media posts as proof she was alive. Even Salvatore, her fiancé, believed her claims of being sick and isolating, never visiting or raising the alarm. If anyone had reported her missing earlier, the police could have tracked her phone, which was with David the entire time, and solved the case sooner. At the trial, Fontana claimed he deeply regretted his actions and insisted that he loved Carol. He said her death was accidental, and that he had even considered ending his own life afterward because of the grief. However, his explanation was seen as hollow and insincere, especially since he had planned the entire situation, including commissioning the violent video. On June 12, 2023, the court found Fontana guilty of manslaughter. He was sentenced to 30 years in prison and ordered to pay compensation of $200,000 to Carol's son, $100,000 to her mother, and $50,000 to the father of her child. Surprisingly, the court did not classify the killing as particularly cruel, and the dismemberment of the body was not treated as an aggravating factor. This means Fontana could potentially become eligible for parole in the future. Story 4. Have you ever thought about how life can turn into a nightmare in just a moment? One decision, one accident, and everything you know and love can vanish. Let me tell you a story that started as a normal day but ended in a way no one could have imagined. Picture this: it's 3 a.m. and the doorbell rings. You get up, thinking it's a neighbor or maybe a courier at the wrong address. But standing at the door is the man you thought was gone from your life forever. His eyes burn with anger, his fists are clenched, and the air feels heavy with tension. What do? Scream, run, or freeze, realizing this could be your last mistake? Exercise. That's how the story began for Alina Shackett. One day she decided love shouldn't hurt anymore. She left it all behind. But he came back. And what happened next shocked not just Alina but everyone who knew her. Alina Shackett was born in Russia in 1997. When she was 7, her family moved to Pennsylvania in the United States. From a young age, Alina was curious and active. She quickly learned English and developed a passion for art and science. At school, she was seen as talented and determined, always working toward her goals. She was also known for her kindness, often helping classmates and taking part in charity events. After high school, Alina went to the University of Pittsburgh to study biology. She dreamed of becoming a doctor, which motivated her to work hard. Her peers described her as a bright and cheerful person, always ready to help and offer advice. Alina's sense of justice and her warm personality made her stand out. Her family, especially her parents Ellie and Ian, were her biggest supporters. As an only child, Alina was the center of their world. They shared a strong bond, spending time traveling and encouraging her dreams. But in October 2017, something happened that the Shackett family could never have prepared for. Ellie and Ian were used to Alina's constant calls and texts, but soon their world turned upside down. Their daughter was always in touch, especially when they had plans together. But on this day, the silence in their home felt ominous. Alina had vanished without a trace, even on the morning before an important event that usually brought them together, the charity marathon they participated in every year. This breast cancer campaign was close to their hearts, and Alina was always at the center of it. Her care for others was genuine, as though she drew strength from helping people, almost as if she was shielding her family from the dangers of the outside world. But that morning, she didn't show up. There were no messages, no missed calls, nothing. Every minute felt like an eternity. Ellie kept scrolling through her phone, the growing anxiety tightening its grip on her. Ian, sitting behind the wheel, tried to stay calm, but his fixed gaze and trembling hands betrayed his rising fear. The car felt like it was crawling, even though they were rushing to the University of Pittsburgh campus where Alina lived. What should have been a quick 30-minute drive stretched endlessly, their minds racing with worry. When they arrived, Ellie rushed to Alina's apartment, leaving Ian and their dog in the car. Her heart pounded so hard it felt like it might break free from her chest. Her hands shook as she pressed the doorbell. Each second of waiting felt unbearable, an eternity filled with dread. The silence inside the apartment was oppressive, the kind that makes the walls feel like they're closing in. Ellie and Ian stood on the doorstep, frozen in fear. There was no warmth, no sound of life, just a chilling emptiness that only deepened their unanswered questions. It felt as though the entire world had come to a standstill, holding its breath in anticipation of something terrible. Even the air seemed heavier, pressing down on them. Desperate, Ellie pulled out her phone one last time to call Alina. Each ring echoed loudly in her heart, filling the silence with unbearable tension. Each unanswered ring felt like a thread of hope snapping, leaving Ellie and Ian more desperate with every passing second. No one could have imagined that a day starting so normally would turn into the worst nightmare for the Sharkey family. Just minutes earlier, Ellie had been frantically trying to contact her daughter. Now, she stood outside Alina's locked door, her fists pounding on the wood. The sound echoed through the empty house, but there was no response. She called out Alina's name, her voice trembling and rising to a shout, but silence was the only reply. Ellie's panic grew as the reality of the situation began to sink in. Something was terribly wrong. She screamed for Ian, her voice laced with terror. Ian ran to her, fear giving him a surge of strength. He knew every second was precious, each moment stretching into unbearable emptiness. Ian began hitting the door with all his might. Each blow deepened the sense of impending doom until, finally, the door gave way with a sharp crack, revealing a scene that neither of them was prepared for. Zach, Alina's neighbor, had been watching from the staircase, frozen in shock. He instinctively stepped back, as if trying to shield himself from the unfolding horror. When the door opened, the weight of what lay inside spilled into the hallway like a dark tide. Inside, silence loomed heavier than ever, no longer hiding the grim truth. The room was smeared with dark stains, walls and floors marked by something unspeakable. It was as if the light itself had been consumed by darkness. At first, Ellie and Ian couldn't comprehend the sight in front of them. Alina's face was so unrecognizable that it took them a moment to realize they were looking at their own daughter. Ellie's scream shattered the oppressive quiet, her voice cutting through the house like a blade. The walls seemed to tremble with the force of her agony. Ian stood frozen, paralyzed by the sheer horror of what he saw. His mind struggled to make sense of the unimaginable. In that instant, the world as they knew it came to a halt, irreparably changed. Their dog, sensing their fear and panic, began barking wildly, its cries adding to the chaos that had overtaken the house. The once familiar home was now a place of terror and heartbreak, a scene no one could have foreseen. The house felt as if it had been consumed by an impenetrable darkness. Ellie's screams filled the air, a raw expression of her pain, while Ian finally managed to step forward. His legs trembled with each step, his body barely able to move under the weight of the terror that had taken over their home. He didn't know what to do. No one did. Hearing the cries, Zach mustered the courage to approach the room. He stopped at the doorway, frozen in place, reluctant to enter. Yet from where he stood, he could already see enough to know that life for this family would never be the same. There, on the floor, lay Alina. Her body was sprawled as if she had fought with everything she had to protect herself, to survive. The sight was heartbreaking. Half of her face was so disfigured it seemed as though whoever or whatever had taken her life had stolen her very identity. In shock, Zach pulled out his phone, his trembling fingers barely able to dial. He called emergency services, his voice shaking as he tried to explain what he was seeing. The air felt suffocating, as if it were pressing down on everyone in the house. How do they physically do it? Moments later, the sound of sirens pierced the stillness of the morning. The wailing grew louder, echoing through the quiet streets and shattering the fragile calm of the neighborhood. An ambulance screeched to a halt outside the house, and the paramedics, focused and serious, rushed to the door. Their footsteps echoed in the cold, unfamiliar space that now felt hostile and heavy. Ellie, still standing motionless at the door, turned to meet them. Her face said everything: her grief, her disbelief, her despair. She tried to point toward the room, but her hands were shaking so badly she could barely manage the gesture. Ian, silent and overwhelmed, stood nearby, watching the scene unfold as if from a distance. The paramedics entered the dimly lit room. The curtains allowed only faint traces of light, making the horrific scene even more somber. Kneeling beside Alina's body, they worked quickly, their movements practiced and mechanical. They checked for a pulse, their expressions revealing the truth before they spoke. It took only seconds, but for Ellie and Ian, time seemed to stretch endlessly. When one of the paramedics finally shook his head, their world shattered. Ellie collapsed to her knees, a gut-wrenching cry escaping her lips. It was a sound of pure heartbreak, of a mother's soul breaking into pieces. Ian's shoulders sagged, his face pale and drained of life. Everything they had known, everything they had loved, was gone in an instant. Ellie collapsed to her knees, her screams echoing through the house, as if sheer willpower could undo what had happened, as if her cries could bring her daughter back. Ian, nearly frozen with shock, did the only thing he could. He wrapped his arms around his wife, holding her tightly, as though grounding her would somehow anchor them both in this new, unbearable reality. But even he felt like the ground beneath him had disappeared. The paramedics stayed in the room a little longer, preparing to take the next steps. Officially declaring Alina's death felt like a final, crushing blow to her parents, a sentence from which they would never recover. Outside, the flashing red and blue lights of police cars illuminated the quiet suburban street. Neighbors began to gather, their curiosity drawing them closer. Some whispered in hushed tones, others glanced around nervously, while a few took out their phones to record the unfolding tragedy. The once peaceful street was now a grim spectacle. Panting at Alina's house, barricades and patrol cars formed a boundary, isolating the crime scene from the rest of the neighborhood. Police officers with stern faces set up barriers, attempting to shield the outside world from the horrors within. Dragged along with the captives, Alina was led before a police car. Leading the investigation was Police Chief Scott Schubert, who, along with a team of detectives, meticulously combed through the house. Every detail was documented: a shattered mirror, an overturned table, and belongings scattered chaotically across the floor. All of it pointed to a violent and desperate struggle. The medical examiner's report would later confirm what the scene already suggested. Alina had died from multiple blows with a blunt object. This was no impulsive act of anger. It was brutal, calculated, and filled with rage. Every detail screamed of violence, terror, and despair. Outside, the crowd continued to grow, with whispers and rumors spreading like wildfire. Some spoke of Alina's boyfriend, others mentioned the turbulence in their relationship, but no one had imagined it would come to this. In a neighborhood accustomed to quiet and calm, the crime sent shockwaves through the community. Conversations turned to speculation, and soon the focus narrowed to one name: Matthew Darby. Matthew, Alina's ex-boyfriend, was a well-known figure. A young, talented basketball player, he had gained attention not just for his performance on the university court, but also for his charisma and popularity. Always surrounded by people, Matthew was seen as confident, charming, and successful. But beneath that polished exterior lay a darker side, one that no one had foreseen would lead to such a devastating end. Behind Matthew Darby's confident exterior lurked destructive emotions that grew stronger when it came to Alina. What started as a passionate romance during their time at university in Greensburg soon turned into a toxic cycle of jealousy and control. The dynamic between them shifted when Alina transferred to another campus. She sought a fresh start, determined to focus on her studies and distance herself from their increasingly volatile relationship. Breaking things off with Matthew felt like the right choice, but he couldn't handle it. his charm and self-assurance shattered, replaced by an obsessive anger he couldn't contain. He began to follow her, inundate her with calls, and invade her life in ways that went far beyond what anyone could consider normal. On September 20th, 2017, Alina, her hands trembling with fear, filed a police report. That night, Matthew had crossed a line she never imagined possible. He broke into her apartment by climbing through a second-story window, an act straight out of a horror movie. She had heard the sound of someone scaling the drainpipe but never thought it could be him. Until he burst into her room, his eyes filled with fury. He accused her of betrayal, of ignoring his calls and abandoning him. The argument escalated into physical violence. He grabbed her shoulders, shoving her onto the bed, and squeezed her wrists so tightly that bruises remained for days. Filing the police report gave her a fragile sense of relief, a belief that justice would protect her. Jan and Ellie stood by her side through it all, accompanying her to court. When the judge granted a restraining order against Matthew, it felt like a step towards safety. His arrest for unlawful entry was a moment of hope for Alina and her family, a sign that the nightmare might finally end. But their hope was short-lived. Despite the charges, Matthew was released on bail for $10,000, a sum that allowed him to return to the world, leaving Alina vulnerable. For her parents, this felt like an injustice, but they could never have imagined the full extent of what was to come. Only a few days later, the sense of dread that had hung over their lives solidified into tragedy. The home where Alina had sought peace became the scene of her worst fears realized. Investigators who arrived that day moved with the weight of hindsight, recognizing that opportunities to protect her had been missed. The Precipice of Hell by Ruth Glazer Ellie, standing silently behind the police tape, no longer cried. Her face was blank, frozen in shock and disbelief. She stared at the house where her daughter's laughter had once filled the rooms, now consumed by an unbearable emptiness. Every decision, every system that was supposed to keep Alina safe had failed, leaving the Shackett family to endure an unimaginable loss. Jan stood silently beside Ellie, holding her hand as they both tried to process the unimaginable loss. Matthew Darby, though physically absent for periods of time, had never truly left Alina's world. His presence loomed like a dark shadow, invading every part of her life. Alina's neighbor Zach later admitted he often saw Darby lurking outside her house. It was as if he belonged there, Zach recalled, his voice heavy with regret. He had watched Darby stand for hours, hidden in the shadows, peering into Alina's windows. Zach now realized he had unknowingly witnessed the slow unfolding of a tragedy he failed to understand at the time. Despite Alina's efforts to break free, changing passwords, blocking his number and distancing herself, Matthew always found a way to reinsert himself into her life. His jealousy was uncontrollable, consuming him like a wildfire. Zach remembered one particular night when Darby stood outside Alina's window, yelling furiously. His voice, filled with rage and unbridled jealousy, echoed through the quiet street. It wasn't just anger, it was obsession, escalating with each encounter. A month before the tragic events, Darby had taken control of Alina's online world. He hacked her social media accounts, deleting any interactions he deemed inappropriate. Even in the virtual space, he sought complete dominance. Alina fought to maintain her independence, but her efforts were no match for Matthew's relentless determination. On the fateful night of September 20th, no one in the neighborhood knew the horror taking place behind Alina's closed doors. Zach later recalled hearing a strange sound, like something breaking, but he dismissed it, thinking it was just the quirks of an old house. Moments later, a loud crash, followed by a scream, pierced the night. A sound so raw with terror, it sent chills down his spine. Unsure of what to do, Zach sent a message in the house's group chat, hoping for a response, but there was none. It was only later that Zach learned Matthew Darby had already broken into Alina's home by then, starting the violent attack that would end her life. Police investigators found that Alina had been frantically calling for help between 4:15 and 4:55 a.m. Her last call was to Darby's number, and her phone was later tracked to Route A76, near the town of Irwin. a final, desperate attempt to save herself that went unanswered. Adding to the grim puzzle was the testimony of a taxi driver who became a key witness. He reported picking up Darby around 4:21 a.m. and driving him to the intersection of Seal Street and Ward Street in Oakland. Darby asked the driver to wait for him for a couple of minutes, but those minutes stretched into 10. What transpired during that time would soon become part of the chilling evidence against him. Alina's fight for freedom and safety had tragically ended, leaving behind a trail of mischances, unanswered cries for help, and a community forever haunted by what could have been done to save her. The passerby's quick thinking led officers to act swiftly. When they arrived at the scene in Myrtle Beach, South Carolina, they found Matthew Darby attempting to climb through a window, his disheveled appearance a stark contrast to the confident young man once admired by so many. He tried to flee, but the officers apprehended him after a brief struggle. The arrest marked the end of a frantic manhunt, but for Alina's family, it was only the beginning of a long journey toward justice. Darby was extradited to Pennsylvania, where he faced a mountain of evidence linking him to Alina's murder. The items recovered from the manhole, 2 knives, a hammer, and traces of blood were analyzed and confirmed to contain Alina's DNA. Surveillance footage, phone records, and the testimonies of witnesses like Zach and the taxi driver painted a chilling picture of premeditation and brutality. During the trial, the prosecution presented a compelling case detailing Darby's escalating pattern of obsession, control, and violence. They described how his jealousy consumed him, leading to the calculated murder of the woman he claimed to love. The defense attempted to argue mental instability, but the evidence was overwhelming. Ellie and Jan sat through every day of the trial, their faces etched with grief and resolve. They listened as witnesses recounted Alina's attempts to escape Darby's grip, her calls for help, and the system's failure to protect her. Each piece of evidence was a painful reminder of their loss, but they were determined to see justice served. In the end, the jury deliberated for only a few hours before returning a guilty verdict. Darby was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. For Alina's family, it was a bittersweet victory. While the man who took their daughter's life would never walk free again, no punishment could ever bring her back. After the trial, Ellie and Jan channeled their pain into action. They became advocates for stronger protections for victims of domestic violence, pushing for reforms to ensure that no other family would have to endure what they had. Through their efforts, they established a foundation in Alina's name, dedicated to supporting survivors and raising awareness about the warning signs of abusive relationships. 8. Although Alina's life was tragically cut short, her story became a powerful force for change, a legacy that would protect others from suffering the same fate. In the quiet moments, when the world around them grew still, Ellie and Jan found solace in the memories of their daughter's laughter, her kindness and her unyielding strength, a reminder that even in the face of darkness, her light would continue to shine, showing Darby stalking Alina just days before the murder. The footage captured him pacing near her dormitory, watching her movements, and even attempting to speak to her despite the restraining order. These actions illustrated his obsessive behavior and the calculated nature of his crime. In court, prosecutors also revealed Darby's online activity. He had searched for information on tracking devices, how to disable security cameras, and even disturbing topics related to violent acts. These searches painted a chilling picture of a man who meticulously planned his actions, leaving no doubt about his intent. Witnesses were called to the stand, including Alina's friends and professors, who described her as a vibrant, kind-hearted young woman with a bright future. They spoke about her fear in the weeks leading up to her death, her attempts to distance herself from Darby, and her struggles to regain control over her life. Ellie and Jan sat through the testimonies, their grief etched deeply into their faces. Every detail was a painful reminder of the system's failure to protect their daughter. Yet, they remained resolute, knowing that their fight for justice was as much for Alina as it was for the countless others who might be saved by her story. As the trial progressed, the defense attempted to paint Darby as a man suffering from emotional instability and mental health issues. They argued that his actions stemmed from a lack of control and an inability to cope with rejection. However, The prosecution dismantled this narrative, focusing instead on the deliberate and calculated nature of his crime. The community continued to rally around Alina's family, with vigils held in her honor and social media campaigns demanding justice. The hashtag Justice for Alina trended for weeks, drawing national attention to the case and the broader issue of domestic violence. Finally, after weeks of emotional testimony and undeniable evidence, the jury reached a verdict. Matthew Darby was found guilty of first-degree murder, burglary, and several other charges. He was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. The courtroom erupted into quiet sobs as Ellie and Jan embraced, their tears a mix of relief and sorrow. They had achieved justice for their daughter, but their lives would never be the same. In the months that followed, Alina's law gained momentum in the state legislature, eventually passing with overwhelming support. The law mandated stricter monitoring of individuals with restraining orders, including GPS tracking for those deemed high risk. Alina's memory became a beacon of hope for others, her story a reminder of the urgent need to address domestic violence. Though her life was tragically cut short, Alina's legacy lived on, not only through the law that bore her name, but also in the hearts of those who loved her, and the countless lives her story would go on to save, by highlighting the overwhelming evidence presented during the initial trial. Story 5. The daily news of crimes can sometimes be so cruel that it shakes even the strongest people. These shocking events make us question human behavior and morality. However, it's crucial to remember that such incidents are rare. Most people in society are peaceful. This story involves two individuals whose actions crossed cultural boundaries, resulting in the tragic deaths of two people. The incident happened in Sweden and highlighted ongoing societal issues. Saga, a 20-year-old woman, was 7 months pregnant at the time. She was in a 2-year relationship with Maga Mudan Ibrahim, whom she affectionately called Amin. He was the father of her unborn child, and the couple was eagerly awaiting their baby boy. According to doctors, the pregnancy was going smoothly, and Saga was thrilled to become a mother. She was preparing with excitement, decorating the baby's room, shopping for essentials, and doing exercises. Saga shared her joy on social media, posting pictures of her growing belly and the baby clothes she bought. Her mother, Melissa, often visited to support her. On December 28th, the day before the tragedy, Saga told Melissa that Amin would visit so they could talk. Their relationship had recently become tense, and Amin didn't visit as often. Respecting their privacy, Melissa chose not to interfere. Saga was a kind, bright, and well-mannered young woman who got along easily with others. She had many admirers because of her beauty, but dreamed of building a happy family. Melissa, however, had concerns about Amin. His Somali background introduced cultural differences, which Saga had mentioned caused problems in their relationship. Melissa was surprised and uneasy when she met Amin at her home, aware of the challenges Saga might face in the relationship. Despite the challenges in her relationship, Saga remained full of optimism and hope. She deeply loved Amin and worked hard to keep their bond strong, even though she felt hurt that he kept her a secret from his family. This caused frequent arguments between them. On the afternoon of April 29, 2023, Saga's mother, Melissa Alorg, visited her daughter's apartment in the city of U, located 100 kilometers from Stockholm. Melissa planned to help Saga with preparations for the baby's arrival and pick up some items. When she arrived, she was talking on the phone with her other daughter. She rang the doorbell but got no response. After several tries, she called and texted Saga, but there was still no answer. Melissa assumed Saga might have forgotten about the visit and gone out. Though this was unusual, Melissa had a spare key and decided to enter the apartment, not wanting to disturb the couple. As she approached the door, she noticed it was unlocked, which immediately raised alarm bells. Saga was always cautious, locking the door even for a quick trip to check the mail or use the laundry room. Entering the apartment, Melissa heard water running in the kitchen. She turned off the faucet and called out for her daughter, but there was no reply. Moving toward the living room where the lights were off, she noticed something strange. Turning on the light, she was met with a horrifying sight. Saga was lying on the floor, pale and motionless. Her hair covered her face, and a table lamp cord was tightly wrapped around her neck. To Melissa's shock, a heavy table had overturned, pressing down on Saga's throat. Melissa screamed in terror and rushed to her daughter. She managed to push the table away and remove the cord from Saga's neck. In a panic, she called an ambulance and tried to Saga with CPR. However, it was clear that her daughter's body was cold to the touch, indicating she had been dead for some time. Despite her efforts, Melissa was unable to bring her daughter back. The ambulance arrived quickly, but it was already too late. As expected, when the medics arrived, they could only confirm the deaths of the young woman and her unborn child. Police officers examined the apartment and Saga's body carefully. They found injuries on her head and face, with clotted blood tangled in her hair. While there were no clear signs of a struggle, some furniture was displaced and jewelry boxes lay overturned, their contents scattered across the floor. Interestingly, there were no indications of forced entry, leading detectives to initially consider the possibility of suicide. However, this theory was quickly dismissed. Investigations into Saga's phone data and conversations, along with insights from her family, made it clear that she had no mental health issues and was full of joy and anticipation for her baby. Suicide was entirely out of character for her. Forensic experts collected fingerprints and DNA samples from the scene, including traces found under Saga's nails and on the furniture. The autopsy revealed that Saga had died from strangulation, with her time of death estimated between 1 and 3 in the morning. Her unborn baby boy, weighing 1.7 kilograms, was found to be perfectly healthy, which only deepened the tragedy. Melissa, overwhelmed with grief and anger, demanded justice for her daughter and grandson. The horrifying event shocked Saga's family and friends, who struggled to believe that someone so close could commit such a brutal act. Saga had no connections to the criminal world, and her tragic death felt incomprehensible. Detectives immediately launched an investigation, starting with interviews of Saga's family members. Melissa shared that on April 28th, Saga had planned to meet some friends at a local restaurant, and Melissa had joined them as well. During the gathering, Melissa noticed her daughter was unusually anxious, constantly checking her phone. Saga appeared preoccupied and admitted she was waiting for a message from Amin. Saga confided in her mother that Amin was finally planning to introduce her to his family. However, he was deeply worried about how they would react to her pregnancy, especially since they weren't married. According to Saga, Amin was under immense pressure and seemed on the verge of a breakdown. Amin was deeply worried that his family, strict Somali Muslims with conservative beliefs, would not accept his relationship with Saga. Saga, on the other hand, was half Thai, half European, and a Swedish citizen with modern views. The cultural and religious differences between their families often led to tension. Amin, though raised in Europe and more progressive than his parents, still respected their traditions, which added to the strain. Like many of his fellow hammerhammers, he smiled when he thought about it. After visiting the restaurant, Saga said goodbye to her mother and friends. They wished her well, not knowing it would be their last time seeing her alive. Detectives later discovered that Saga was killed after she returned home. Investigators theorized that Amin might have disclosed his relationship to his family, which could have provoked a violent reaction leading to the tragedy. Early in the investigation, Amin's family members were scrutinized. His mother's behavior raised suspicion as she was seen leaving her home late that evening. However, it was confirmed that she had only gone to the store and returned within 15 minutes. His best friend said no evidence linked her or any family members to the crime. Amin's mother had shown hostility toward him after learning about his relationship. The situation worsened when she found out that Amin's car had been parked near Saga's home. By then, his family had suspected he was seeing a Christian woman. Furious, his mother told Amin he was no longer welcome in their house, believing that family traditions warranted severing ties. Amin managed to convince her that he hadn't visited Saga, but it was a difficult conversation. Melissa revealed that tensions between Saga and Amin grew worse after Saga's pregnancy. There were rumors that Amin had pressured Saga to have an abortion, fearing his family's disapproval. However, Saga stood firm in her decision to keep the baby. She told her mother that if necessary, she was prepared to raise her child alone. This determination, paired with the joy she felt about becoming a mother, made the tragic events that followed even harder to comprehend. In October, Saga shared the news of her pregnancy with her family, who were overjoyed, just as she was. However, during this time, her relationship with Amin grew strained. Saga frequently expressed frustration over the cultural differences between them, feeling that without a change in Amin's perspective, their relationship couldn't last. Despite these challenges, things seemed to improve after a few months. Amin appeared to accept the pregnancy and even seemed happy about becoming a father. Saga decided to move into a larger apartment to accommodate her growing family. She began setting up a nursery and preparing for her baby's arrival. By March 2023, their relationship was still intact, though troubling incidents arose. One such incident involved a woman named Deanna, who approached Saga privately. Deanna claimed that Amin had tried to persuade her to attack Saga, suggesting she kick Saga in the stomach to induce a miscarriage. When confronted, Amin vehemently denied the accusation, calling it a lie. Melissa was aware of these unsettling events, which left her deeply concerned for her daughter. As the police pieced together the events leading to Saga's death, they found that on April 27th, Saga and Amin had planned to spend the evening together. However, Amin avoided her, claiming he was delayed at work. This behavior led Saga to issue an ultimatum. He had to tell his family about their relationship, her pregnancy, and her new apartment, or their relationship would end. The following day, April 28th, both Saga and Amin were busy with work, but kept in touch via messages. Melissa later noted that Saga seemed unusually anxious, likely due to the ongoing tensions with Amin. Police investigations into Saga's phone revealed that their conversation remained active until around 11 p.m. At 11:15 p.m., Amin messaged Saga, telling her he wouldn't tell his family about their relationship or the baby. He explained that his family's approval was more important to him than an extramarital child. Saga was clearly upset by his decision and tried to convince him otherwise. She reasoned that his family would eventually find out about the child, especially if they broke up, as she planned to seek financial support from him. Amin's last message to Saga indicated he was extremely anxious, claiming his heart felt like it might jump out of his chest. This was the final communication before Saga was killed. Detectives believed her persistence and the risk of her revealing their relationship to his family gave Amin a compelling motive for the attack. As the sole suspect in the case, Amin was brought in for questioning. The 22-year-old denied any involvement in Saga's death. He claimed that on the night of the murder, he had gone to his family to confess his relationship with her. However, geolocation data proved this was false. He had in fact gone to Saga's apartment. Detectives initially withheld details about Saga's death during the interrogation to observe his reaction. Amin's demeanor was oddly calm, even lighthearted, as he joked with the officers. When they mentioned Saga's apartment address, he showed no reaction and acted as if he didn't recognize her. When informed that he was the main suspect, Amin became defensive. He insisted he had an alibi, claiming he was driving with a friend at the time of the murder. However, the friend, who had been talking to others on the phone, refused to support Amin's story. This rendered his alibi unreliable. Amin's narrative also became inconsistent. Initially, he claimed he hadn't seen Saga since the evening of December 27th. However, when questioned further, he admitted to visiting her apartment to discuss their relationship, and her insistence that he tell his parents about her and the baby. Saga had also urged Amin to move in with her, so they could start a family. Yet detectives confirmed that Amin had never spent a night at her new apartment, avoiding it out of fear his family might find out. Despite promising Saga he would move in, Amin repeatedly made excuses to delay. His inconsistent statements, contradictory actions, and suspicious behavior led investigators to arrest him. He was taken into custody while authorities continued to clarify the circumstances of Saga's death. Amin was held in custody for several months as the investigation progressed. Eventually, the prosecution gathered enough convincing evidence to secure a strong case against him. Following the evidence, specially trained dogs were used to identify and confirm traces linking Amin to the crime scene. While the defense argued that dogs were not a reliable source of evidence, this was only one piece of the broader case. The most compelling evidence came from DNA analysis. The results confirmed Amin's direct involvement in Saga's murder. Detectives demonstrated that he had strangled her using a lamp cord while she was asleep on sofa. However, Amin's actions didn't stop there. According to investigators, after strangling Saga, he dragged her to the floor and attempted to use a 30 kilograms table to harm her further. It appeared he intended to tip the table onto her stomach to end the pregnancy. Despite being injured in the struggle, Saga managed to protect her unborn child. Frustrated, Amin then placed the tabletop edge on Saga's throat, pinning her down. Unable to resist further, Saga suffocated under the weight of the table. The heavy object left a visible mark on her neck, corroborating the sequence of events reconstructed by forensic experts. After the murder, Amin staged the scene to resemble a robbery. Drawers were emptied and several household items were scattered. However, detectives found missing items in Amin's possession during subsequent searches. He claimed these were his belongings or gifts from friends, but the explanation didn't hold up under scrutiny. Additional evidence included traces of Amin's DNA under Saga's nails, indicating a struggle. Furthermore, forensic analysis revealed that Saga had engaged in sexual intercourse shortly before her death, which pointed to Amin as the likely partner. The prosecution argued that the staged robbery along with Amin's attempt to cover his tracks worsened the severity of his actions. Meanwhile, the defense's claims of a random robbery were undermined by the overwhelming evidence against him, further solidifying the case for the prosecution. Amin insisted that his physical intimacy with Saga had occurred by mutual consent and days before her death. However, the prosecution doubted his claims, given his history of deception throughout the investigation. Evidence from the crime scene and contradictory statements further undermined his credibility. One of the key pieces of evidence was the extensive presence of Amin's DNA in Saga's apartment, contradicting his initial claims that he had never been to her new address. Investigators also corroborated the testimony of Diana, who had warned Saga about Amin's attempts to harm her. Diana's statements were bolstered by alarming search history records on Amin's devices, including searches about whether a kick to a pregnant woman's stomach could harm an unborn child. This painted a clear picture of premeditation. The prosecution presented months of correspondence between Saga and Amin, highlighting their escalating discord since November 2022, primarily over her pregnancy. Saga's persistence in encouraging Amin to acknowledge their relationship to his family, as seen in their final conversations on April 28, placed mounting pressure on him. Amin's defenders argued that this pressure contributed to his mental state, but it did not absolve him of the heinous crime. The prosecution maintained that, instead of confessing to his family, Amin went to Saga's apartment, intending to confront her. The confrontation escalated into violence, driven by his fear of his parents' reaction and unwillingness to commit to a future with Saga and their child. The brutal manner in which he murdered her reflected cold-blooded premeditation. The defense attempted to argue that the DNA under Saga's nails could have been from earlier interactions, as the two were in a relationship. However, Saga's mother, Melissa, refuted this claim, pointing out her daughter's obsessive cleanliness, particularly during pregnancy. Melissa testified that Saga habitually showered shortly before bed and would never have gone unwashed for an extended period, making it highly improbable for old DNA to remain under her nails. The combination of Amin's lies, his incriminating search history, the confirmed testimony of Diana, and the forensic evidence ultimately painted a damning portrait of guilt, leaving little room for doubt about his involvement in the murder of Saga and their unborn child. From the evidence gathered, it became increasingly clear to detectives that Amin had carefully orchestrated his actions around the time of Saga's death. Forensic analysis confirmed that all DNA traces left on her body and belongings were fresh, having been deposited during the violent confrontation. This contradicted Amin's claims and further implicated him in the crime. Additionally, Amin's behavior after the murder raised significant suspicion. He immediately deleted Saga from his Snapchat and other social media accounts, erasing recent correspondence. Detectives easily recovered the deleted data, which added to the growing body of evidence against him. This attempt to sever ties and conceal his connection with Saga and the crime spoke volumes about his guilt. Geolocation records placed Amin near Saga's apartment building at around 8 p.m. on the night of the murder. He stayed in the vicinity, sending messages but not approaching or leaving, as if hesitating or waiting for the right moment. This period of inactivity suggested that he was mentally preparing himself for the attack or waiting for Saga to fall asleep. Between midnight and 2 a.m., the estimated time of the murder, Amin's phone activity abruptly ceased. Forensic evidence later revealed that this was the same time frame during which Saga and her unborn child were killed. During this period, Amin's phone was set to airplane mode, effectively silencing all incoming calls and messages. His friend Samir tried to contact him multiple times, but the calls were ignored. Cell tower records confirmed that Amin's phone was in the same residential complex where Saga lived, further contradicting his claim that he was at home with his parents during those hours. Amin's phone became active again at 2:16 a.m., coinciding with the conclusion of forensic experts regarding the time of Saga's death. This precise alignment further reinforced the timeline of events and Amin's involvement. Despite this mounting evidence, Amin's version of events continued to shift, further eroding his credibility. At one point, he admitted to being near Saga's apartment but denied entering it. At another, he claimed he had not seen her in days. Detectives and prosecutors used this web of lies, alongside forensic and digital evidence, to build a strong case against Amin. His inconsistent statements, coupled with the undeniable physical evidence, pointed to a calculated and deliberate act of murder. The defense's efforts to paint Amin as a devoted and conflicted partner were undermined by the growing mountain of evidence against him. During the trial, it was revealed that throughout his 2-year relationship with Saga, Amin had been unfaithful multiple times, engaging in intimate encounters with other women. This not only contradicted his claims of love and loyalty, but also cast significant doubt on his character and integrity. The prosecution leveraged these details to dismantle the image Amin's lawyer attempted to construct. Amin's fabricated story about a gang of robbers further eroded his credibility. His claim that a bag of money stored in Saga's apartment had motivated the alleged robbery was unsupported by any evidence. Investigators found no signs of forced entry at Saga's residence, and the lack of any significant cash sum reinforced the notion that Amin's story was a desperate attempt to deflect blame. The prosecution argued that the only plausible explanation was that Amin had been let into the apartment by Saga or used a key he possessed, an assertion consistent with the evidence. Despite spending 9 months in custody, Amin never confessed to the crime, maintaining his innocence throughout the investigation and trial. He admitted that he feared his family's reaction to his relationship with Saga, particularly the pregnancy, due to the stark cultural and religious differences between them. Amin's admission highlighted the pressure he felt, but it also underscored the prosecution's argument that this pressure could have driven him to commit the murder. The jury deliberated the evidence and arguments for several days, ultimately reaching a unanimous verdict on November 9, 2024. Magid Amin Ibrahim was found guilty of the premeditated murder of Saga and her unborn child. He was sentenced to life imprisonment, a punishment reflective of the gravity of his crime. Despite the conviction, Amin continued to insist on his innocence, claiming that he had loved Saga and their unborn child and that he had no intention of harming them. However, his actions, coupled with the overwhelming evidence, painted a different picture. A young man who, consumed by fear of familial dishonor and societal judgment, committed a heinous act that ended 2 innocent lives. The case served as a stark reminder of the devastating consequences of cultural and familial pressures when combined with personal insecurities and a lack of accountability. Saga's family, while devastated by her loss, expressed hope that justice had been served and that her story would inspire others to prioritize love and respect over prejudice and fear. The defense, continuing to insist that Amin was not guilty, maintained the argument that Saga had become the victim of a random robbery. They asserted that they would appeal the verdict, seeking to secure Amin's freedom. The appeal was filed immediately following the court's decision, though the outcome of this legal struggle remained uncertain. Despite the conviction for the murder of Saga, no charges were filed for the death of her unborn child, which sparked outrage within Saga's family. They felt that the child's death had been completely disregarded, overshadowed by the focus on Saga's tragic end. The case quickly gained widespread attention from both the media and the public, igniting intense discussions about migrants, particularly those from Muslim sojourning countries arriving in Sweden. With an increasing number of migrants seeking asylum and a growing debate over integration, the murder became emblematic of the tensions surrounding cultural assimilation and the challenges posed by differing worldviews. Critics of the migrant influx pointed to the brutality of the crime as evidence of the difficulties migrants face in adapting to European societal norms, especially when entrenched religious and cultural beliefs come into conflict with the values of the host country. Some members of the public, however, voiced support for Amin, maintaining that the young man had never shown a tendency toward cruelty. His family continued to advocate for his innocence, convinced of his good character. They argued that Amin's actions were driven by an overwhelming fear of his conservative family's rejection, rather than any malice towards Saga or their unborn child. Despite this defense, the evidence against him remained irrefutable, leading to his conviction for the murder of both Saga and her child. Saga's family, devastated by the loss of their daughter and grandchild, found little comfort in the ongoing legal battle. They felt that the justice system had failed to address the full scope of the tragedy, especially regarding the loss of the unborn child. Nonetheless, the case had forced Sweden to confront difficult conversations about cultural clashes and the potential dangers of uncompromising traditionalism when juxtaposed with modern European values. As the rain falls and the night deepens, thank you for being here with me at Radio Night Crime. True crime stories remind us of life's mysteries and the need to stay aware, even in the stillness of the night. If you enjoyed tonight's story, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. Let the sound of the rain lull you to sleep, and until next time, stay safe, stay curious, and let the night keep you company.